Hi everyone, this is People of Substance by LemonSkies. I'm Olga and I'm excited to introduce today's guest, Tony Martignetti. Hopefully I didn't butcher your name fully.
No, you didn't. No, you said it perfectly.
Great. So Tony is a plant giving advisor, and that's one of the subjects that we'll cover today. So Tony, I'm jumping right in with my questions here. Can you tell me a little bit about your background? Because you didn't start out in the nonprofit sector, did you?
No, first, thank you very much for hosting me, Olga. Thank you. I'm grateful. No, I started out as a lawyer, but I hated practicing law. I only lasted about 2 years in New York City law practice, and then I re-engineered myself to a much happier life in planned giving. I started as a frontline fundraiser so as a director of planned giving at two nonprofits. And that was 1997 I began. So this is my 29th year in planned giving. And then in 2003, I started consulting devoted to planned giving.
So did you set out to focus on planned giving intentionally, or was it your legal background that sort of helped pave the way for that?
I always wanted to, once I realized I wanted to move into nonprofit fundraising, I knew there was an advantage to having a legal background for planned giving. However, I have to say very, very quickly, you do not need to have a legal background. You don't need to have a lawyer on your board. You don't need to have a consultant or a lawyer on your staff. None of these things, none of those are necessary to launch planned giving the way I recommend and the way I write about in the book.
Yeah. So, let me kind of shift gears. One of the things that you talk about, and I think it spans beyond planned giving piece, the other 95%, which I believe refers to nonprofits that are not big, enormous enterprise size organizations that do have attorneys, do have dedicated staff. So can you just tell me a little bit about your 95% philosophy?
Yeah, the other 95% is exactly right. As you said it, Olga. It's the majority of nonprofits are small and mid-size. That's who I do planned giving consulting for. That's who I wrote the book for, so that they're not intimidated at all by planned giving. So that they understand, so that the other 95% understand that planned giving is easy and accessible and affordable for them.
Yeah. So where do small organizations start? I mean, what do you prioritize? How do you dedicate resources it surely takes to get any sort of program off the ground?
Yeah, the first three chapters of my book are the first three steps that you take. So chapter 1 is step 1, chapter 2 is step 2, chapter 3 is step 3. Step 1 is identify your top prospects. And these are your most loyal, committed, long-term donors. Olga, these are the folks who have been giving to you for 15, 20, 25 years, maybe even more in some cases. These are your best planned giving prospects. The longevity of their giving, and somebody in the nonprofit in your office knows them, has a good relationship with them, takes their calls, replies to their emails. They come out to events. That's how you identify your top prospects. That's step 1. Step 2 is you start with gifts and wills, and we can flesh any of these out more if you like. And then step 3 is cultivate and solicit your top prospects, the ones you identified in step 1. Start opening conversations. And I believe that within a week of reading just the first 3 chapters of the book, you can launch your planned giving, because launching planned giving is when you're just starting to have conversations. When you have that first planned giving conversation with your first top prospect, you've launched planned giving. And that is the Martignetti 3-step, 1-week planned giving launch.
Great. Well, so tell me you've been at it for several decades. From your experience, do you find that some nonprofit causes lend themselves more to this type of legacy giving than other subject matter?
No, it really is universal. It doesn't matter what your charitable mission is. There's a misunderstanding, I think, that planned giving can only be successful for big hospital systems or big education systems or universities, and that's just not true. Believe me, I wrote a 165-page book explaining and outlining why and how small nonprofits can be very successful in planned giving. So it cuts across any kind of mission. I've worked with an arboretum, I've worked with a historical agency, I've worked with small museums. None of these are major institutions. I haven't worked with any major institutions in launching planned giving programs, because my heart is devoted to the small and mid-sized shops. I want them to know that you can be very successful in planned giving.
Yeah. So let me ask you this: as a fundraiser, it's always exciting when you get that large contribution. As a planned giving officer, you probably hopefully seldom see that gift come to fruition under your tenure. How do you stay at it, and how do you stay motivated?
Well, because this is all about the sustainability of your work. You recognize, and your committed, loyal donors also recognize how important, how critical your work is in your community, however you define community, right? It might be a local community, might be a state, province, if you're in Canada, the world, the globe might be your community. Whatever your community is, it needs your work. You know that. Your loyal, committed, long-term donors know that. And so I think that's how you stay committed to the work of planned giving, is because you know that your work has to continue for decades and generations to come. And through these planned giving conversations, the cultivation and solicitation, you're encouraging these committed donors to extend their commitment, beyond their own lifetime.
Yeah, so let me ask you this. We're talking about small organizations and, obviously always perpetually short-staffed, perpetually underfunded. So how do you make the case for a small nonprofit to prioritize planned giving over, 10 other whack-a-mole priorities that they might be facing?
Yeah, well, you don't really have to prioritize it over. You can do it alongside with your other work. And again, this is set up so that you can have just a couple of top prospects. So when I said, chapter 1 of the book, step 1, identify your top prospects, that doesn't mean that that's 50 top prospects. You might have 3. You might just have 3 or 4 top prospects. Well, that's great. Celebrate that milestone, because you've now identified 3 or 4 top prospects for planned giving that you didn't have a week ago before you read the first 3 chapters of the book. So it's all very scalable. Look, if you do have the luxury of riches and you've got 50 or however many top planned giving prospects that you identify, that's outstanding. But equally outstanding is having even just 2 or 3 top planned giving prospects. And that's it. If that's what your bandwidth allows, because these folks get personal attention and personal cultivation and solicitation, then celebrate that, because you've launched your planned giving when you've identified just 2 or 3 top prospects and you've opened the conversations with them.
What's the typical, I'm actually curious what the benchmark is for a typical legacy bequest gift size. What sort of average do organizations look at?
In the United States, the average charitable bequest, gift in a will, is $35,000. $35,000. And that's actually a little conservative, I think, too. I've seen higher numbers cited, but $35,000 is what I cite in the book and what I say in all my trainings. That's a number I'm very comfortable with citing as the average in the US.
Yeah, I'm just trying to kind of do the mental math of 2 to 3 gift prospects that come to fruition and what it translates to for the organization. So
yeah, and that might be 2 to 3 in your first 6 months, or maybe even 2 to 3 in the first year of planned giving. And then you have 2 or 3 the following year. eventually you'll get to, you'll be scaling, but you have to be sensitive to the bandwidth. And I am, the way I wrote the book, in all my trainings, I'm very sensitive to budget and bandwidth and capacity. This does not require any big launch. Olga, you don't need a campaign to announce that you started planned giving. You don't need a website. You don't even need a web page. You just have to start opening conversations with your loyal, committed donors, those top prospects.
Yeah. Yeah. So something that I've been hearing about and reading about is this notion of the great wealth transfer, the generational transition from, I guess, primarily from boomer generation to younger offspring. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, we saw just in the most recent Giving USA report just out in June that giving by bequests increased 19.7% from 2024 to 2025 in current dollars. Adjusted for inflation, I think it was about a 16% growth. But that's huge. Now that's one data point. Does that signal a trend? No, one point is not a trend. But eventually, if the great wealth transfer of these many trillions of dollars hasn't started yet, it's going to start. It is coming. Baby boomers do have that wealth, and they are dying. So that transfer is coming. I think that makes this a very good time to be serious about getting folks to invest in your longevity, your sustainability, and doing that through gifts and wills.
Yeah. Is boomer generation attuned to planned giving specifically, or are there other generations that just tend to resonate with that more?
Well, it cuts across ages. I recommend that if you have age in your CRM database, that you start by talking to folks who are about 55 to 60 and over, because that's roughly the age where we start thinking about our wills as a method of giving back to those charitable causes that have been important to us in our lives or in our families' lives. So if you have age, but if you don't have age in your database, don't worry about that. You just want to look for the consistency and the long-term nature of the giving.
And to kind of stay with this generational topic, do you think some of the younger generations, millennials, and obviously Gen Zers are quite young, but are they equally attuned to planned giving? Is that something that they will age into, if you will, that's just perhaps not top of mind, or does it resonate with younger audiences?
Yeah, I don't see it resonating as deeply as it will with your baby boomers. And I mean, I'm 64 and I'm a young baby boomer. So, when we talk about baby boomers, we're not talking about necessarily people in their 80s and 90s. Some of us are in our early and mid 60s. I would hasten to add that I'm a young baby boomer, very young baby boomer. But, so that's kind of the sweet spot to start. If people, again, only if you have age in your database. You don't need it, but if you have it, that's roughly the places to start, like 55 to 60 and over. Other, younger generations, they'll get there. I'm not saying it's universal that no one younger would include you in their will. Sure, you could have that conversation with younger folks, but the reason I suggest doing it starting with older ages, is because the older folks are, the more likely the gift will remain in their will until they've died.
Yeah.
So folks who are younger, like 20s, 30s, 40s, that's a lot of stewardship. Even a 40-year-old who puts you in their will, you're committing to what, 40, 50, maybe 60 years of stewardship. That's a lot of years of stewardship. That's a lot of years for a gift to remain in someone's will. So I think when you're launching, you're better working with folks who are on the older side. And then as you scale in future years, you could work younger, but I think it's better to work with the prospects who tend to be 55, 60 and over. And a lot of that will as I said, that'll just kind of come out. If people have been giving to you for 20 or 30 years, odds are they're roughly in that ballpark of age.
Yeah. So, can you talk a little bit about the connection between those who are committing to a legacy gift and they're giving their behavior once they've done that? Does it impact their loyalty, their giving levels in any way?
Yeah, that's a really insightful question, Olga, because you're kind of getting at one of the nasty myths of planned giving, which I thoroughly debunk in the book and in all my trainings, that planned giving is going to hurt your other fundraising. It's going to hurt your annual fund, and people are going to give less outright now that I have 29 years of anecdotes to the contrary. I've seen lots and lots of people increase their other giving after they've told a charity that they have included it in their will because they feel so close. When you put a nonprofit in your will, when your donors do this for you, they've put you alongside their husband, wife, partner, children, and grandchildren in their will. That's a big step.
Yeah.
So I've seen it through the decades that I've been doing planned giving. And then also I can point to the research, the quantitative research of Professor Russell James at Texas Tech University. He's a planned giving empirical researcher, and he also wrote the foreword to my book. So he agrees with my philosophy of launching and just getting out there and starting talking to people. He has a study, which I cite, that on average, 75% of people who inform you that they've included your nonprofit in their will increase, not decrease. It's the exact opposite of the myth. Will increase their other giving to your nonprofit. So there's a good amount of evidence that it does not only doesn't hurt your other fundraising, but actually helps your other fundraising.
Yeah, so that's a very reassuring stat, indeed. So, Tony, just as we wrap up here, are there any other words of advice that you would give to a frazzled fundraising director who is considering different giving programs, different efforts they can undertake? Is there anything that you would share to encourage or support them?
I would encourage a shift in mindset away from the myths around planned giving, that it is going to hurt your other fundraising, that you need expertise, that it's a death conversation. It's a conversation. Actually, it's exactly the opposite. It's a conversation about life, the life and sustainability of your nonprofit in your community. So I would encourage a mindset shift in the executive directors, CEOs, the fundraisers, again, in small and mid-sized nonprofits. That's who I wrote the book for. That's who my career has been devoted to around planned giving fundraising. It's very doable for you. You can be very successful at it, consistent with your bandwidth and your capacity and your budget.
Yeah. Well, Tony, thank you for these insights. And I do feel like sometimes planned giving does get the fuzzy end of the lollipop stick. So thank you for being here. Thank you for dispelling some of these myths. And your book will be out in a few weeks, Planned Giving Accelerated. So that's coming up for anyone who is interested to get their legacy giving off the ground. So,
yeah, you can go to plannedgivingaccelerated.com and join the book waitlist. I'll be launching the book on September 15th, but you can join the waitlist in the meantime.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being here and wonderful conversation.
Thank you very much for hosting, Olga. Thank you.